European Agency for Health and Safety at Work, a partnership that we are very honored to present. I would like to thank Bruno Thiebaud, representing the agency, is here with us today, for his dedication,
Hello.
interest, and commitment in the activities we organize together. Before leaving the word to Miguel Ribeiro, co-director of Doclisboa, I think it's important to say that this event will be divided in two parts. The first one will be dedicated to the presentation of the partnership and to the announcement of the winner of the Healthy Workplaces Film Award, while the second moment will be a debate and discussion on work and labor, both from a social and political point of view. So I would like to thank all the people that made this possible, and I will leave the floor to Miguel. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, those that are seeing us live online. And thank you so much for all the participants that are here. A very special thank you to the filmmakers that are joining for this debate, and to Bruno Thiebaud, who has been a fundamental helping hand in the process of putting together this program, which is a program that we do believe that is fundamental now, as it has always been, but this year really gave us a lot of ideas and struggles that we really need to put in paper and collectively discuss. And that's why festivals have this capacity through film to really give to give elements for a wider discussion. And this is what this program also proposes, is to give different elements that all together, and with our voices and those that are joining this debate today, even if we cannot do it physically this year, really have a wide debate with what everyone will surely be bringing into the table. To start, I want to say that this is the first year that we are presenting this program, but this is something that will have continuity. We are super happy to present this partnership with the European Agency for Health and Safety at Work. And this year we have a wonderful and diverse selection of films that are now screening in the cinemas here in Lisbon, which is something that here people are doing now, going to the cinema again. We don't know for how long, but so far it's been very rewarding to see the audience joining the screenings and discussing the films, and it has been a very important moment along this first moment of programming of Doclisboa that it's now being held in Lisbon. And at the same time, we are presenting a program on dafilms.com, which is available worldwide. And I invite everyone that is watching us from outside of Lisbon to really go there and watch these films. They bring a very wide view on what work and labor how work and labor has been depicted and reflected by artists and filmmakers. So I really invite you to discover this program. Without waiting too long, I will give the word to the executive director of the European Agency, who unfortunately cannot be with us, but very kindly sent us a video. I'm talking about Christa Sedlatshek, who we will now hear a message.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, a well-crafted story can engage, inform, and inspire. And inevitably, it will resonate with us over time. The practice of storytelling is not a new one. For generations, we have learned good practices through the telling of stories, and they have always carried messages even before writing was the main carrier. In our increasingly audiovisual sphere, we now have an array of means at our disposal to share our stories, with documentary film among the most powerful of these tools, sharing not fictional tales, but documenting and mirroring the reality of today. With this in mind, the European Agency for Safety and Health at Work launched the Healthy Workplaces Film Award for the best documentary on work-related topics in 2009. Since 2009, the award honors a documentary film that focuses on the human being in a changing world of work. The film should deal with work-related topics such as physical and psychosocial conditions, risks at work, workers' rights, health and safety aspects, or the effects of political and economic change on the way we work and live. 13 films have been awarded in 10 years. Alongside the prize fund, EU-OSHA also funds the subtitling of the winning films in multiple European languages for use by the directors and EU-OSHA's focal points across the EU member states and the EEA countries to organize screenings and debates. The arrangement of film screenings across Europe to foster debate around the topics highlighted in the films is a powerful tool for the promotion of workplace health and safety. Around 25,000 people have attended screenings over the last 10 years. Today, I would like to warmly welcome Doclisboa's initiative to launch the Body of Work program, which I'm sure will help the documentary film community to better understand the importance of working conditions and of the human being in our ever-changing world of work. And last but not least, I'm especially happy today to announce the winner of the Healthy Workplaces Film Award 2020. And there is a very nice surprise because we have two winners this year, as it has already been the case in the history of this special award. And the two winners are Rules of the Assembly Line at High Speed by Julia Lokschiner from Germany, and Automotive by Jonas Held, also from Germany. Two films which have only their origin, namely Germany, in common, but very different, as powerful as the other, and addressing in two very different ways and tones major questions linked to our world of work in Europe, such as profitability, relocation, robotization, uncertain working conditions, immigration, work accidents, and many more. Congratulations to Julia and Jonas. Thank you all, and let us never forget that safety and health at work is everyone's concern. It's good for us and it's good for business. Finally, I wish you an inspiring and fruitful debate. Thank you.
Congratulations, Julia. Congratulations, Jonas. We are very happy to have both the filmmakers present, so I will immediately give the word to Julia, who can now say a few words. Congratulations, Julia.
Hello, and thank you very much. I did write a short notice in order not to forget, so I would just read out. And say I'm very pleased and honored for our film being selected for this award, and thank you very much, Doclisboa, for this invitation, and the Agency for Health and Safety at Work for the award. My team wanted very much to join this session, but unfortunately they are in other appointments, so I would still like to say that I'm very grateful to all of them, to the producers Isabel Bertolone and Marius Elail, the two camera persons, Zeno Legner and Lili Pongratz, and the editor, Urte Alps, for investing so much energy and time into this film. that did start as a narrative and formal experiment to some extent, trying not only to look into specific issues of working migration in Europe and problems of temporary work in Germany, but also trying to look into the discursive dimension of these structures and to reflect why certain problems and issues are almost invisible in our societies and why they are so hard to express or speak about, which I think is very important, and to find a specific cinematic form for that. Several months after our film had its German premiere this winter, news on working and living conditions of working migrants in German meat production were all over German media due to the COVID infection scandals in German meat factories. And this was something we couldn't have predicted and something we were also not really prepared for. Since then, we've been involved into a lot of talks and panels and discussions on issues around labor migration and its exploitative structures, and also on the educational system in Germany, since high school students also play a very important role in our film. So far, these discussions happened on the national level as a specific German problem or challenge. So now I'm very excited and curious to continue this discussion on an international and European context, since the core problems I think are quite global. And finally, I wanted to say that I am very glad to share this award with Jonas, with whom I started my studies together at the University of Television and Film in Munich some years ago. And we also graduated together with both these films. So thank you very much and congratulations, Jonas.
Thank you very much, Julia. Before watching the trailer for Rules of the Assembly Line at High Speed, I just wanted to say to those that are watching us from Lisbon that Rules of the Assembly Line at High Speed screens today at 7 in Cinema São Jorge, and it has its repetition tomorrow at 3 p.m. also at Cinema São Jorge. Let's watch the trailer for Rules of the Assembly Line at High Speed before giving the words to Jonas, who I also congratulate in advance.
Teilen, verpacken, Hals aufschneiden, aufhängen, Rektum aufbohren, enthäuten, aufschneiden.
Ich habe noch nie 17 Stunden, also nicht mal ansatzweise an einem Tag gearbeitet. Ich kann mir das natürlich überhaupt nicht vorstellen, wie das ist. Und dann heimzukommen praktisch mit seinem 1,12 €, wofür man sich 2 Brezen kaufen kann.
Man kann da wirklich nur sagen, ja, Staat, wo bleibst du?
Быстро, быстро, ну хорошо, я побыстрее ему чуть-чуть. Но я говорю, хорошо, я быстро, да? О, другие быстро не умеют.
Im Kurs 1 werden heute 6 Bulgaren fehlen. 4 können ihre Schicht nicht tauschen, 2 hören mit Kurs auf. Namen habe ich nicht bereit.
Morgen Arbeit.
Arbeitsmigranten hausen in slumartigen Verhältnissen auf Campingplätzen oder in verwohnten und verschimmelten Bruchbuden.
Wir leben auf Kosten derjenigen, die wir ausbeuten, damit wir möglichst billig leben können.
Es dauert schon viel zu lange, dass die Menschen hier so leben müssen und so arbeiten müssen.
Alle Menschen, die bei uns im Werk für Dienstleistungspartner arbeiten, haben ein Arbeitsverhältnis nach deutschem Arbeits- und Sozialrecht. Die haben ein Arbeitsverhältnis mit dem Arbeitgeber, den sie sich ausgesucht haben.
Das Geld soll dienen den Leuten, die arbeiten für und nicht die Wertverträgehändler. Das ist doch keine Ordnung in Deutschland heute.
Ich warte ehrlich gesagt auch ein bisschen auf Widerworte mal. Wir spielen ein krass linksradikales marxistisches Stück. Ich weiß nicht, ob ihr alle so drauf seid.
Congratulations again, Julia. And I now give the word to Jonas Helt.
Hello, can you hear me? I hope so. I want to thank Julia, first of all, for her great words and, of course, for the prize. I don't have too much to add, actually. I also want to thank everybody who made the film possible, my great team, the producers, everybody who believed in the film, and most of all, the protagonists, Eva and Seda. And I just hope that, like, the pandemic and the upcoming lockdown will not hit those even harder who already had to struggle before. And to everybody who has the chance to go to the cinema in Lisbon, I would be very glad if you enjoy the film. I unfortunately also can't make it, and I hope that cinema will be again how it was maybe next year.
Thank you very much, Jonas. I also take the chance, before we watch the trailer for Automotive, I also take the chance to tell you, those that are watching from Lisbon, that Automotive has its premiere next Friday at 7 p.m. in Cinema São Jorge, and then it has its repetition on November 1st at 3 p.m. also at Cinema São Jorge. Let's watch the trailer for Automotive.
Kannst du dir vorstellen, im Büro zu arbeiten?
Nee, bin Arbeiter. Mein Kopf ist nicht so leer für Studierzeug.
Wie kam es denn damals mit der Studienwahl und warum, ich sag mal, ein einfaches BWL-Studium? Ich habe auch BWL studiert, ja, von daher kein Vorwurf.
Zu den braucht man eigentlich keine Gruppe, oder?
Wie bitte? Wie bitte? Knapp 80.000 ist schon ein super Gehalt, ne, für die Berufserfahrung, die Sie mitbringen. Ja?
Ein Mensch ist kein Roboter, also man kann Fehler machen. Ich bin Leiharbeiter, ich kann jederzeit abgemeldet werden.
Wenn ich zu schnell bin, müsst ihr es sagen, gell? Aber es ist Logistiktempo. Der Pinguin mit seinen kleinen Füßen kann ganz schlecht gehen. Aber in dem Moment, wenn er ins Meer hineinspringt, ist er eine Top-Rakete. Was soll das Ihnen sagen und zeigen? Jeder ist einzeln.
Ich stehe bis zu den Knien, in glänzendem Benzin. Der Geruch ist so toll und ich sauge mich voll.
Mikrofon einschalten.
Täglich 3 Liter.
Wo bin ich?
Dann fühle ich mich fitter. Ich fühle mich als gut.
Congratulations, Jonas. And now, also with us to give us an overview of what the Healthy Workplaces Film Award has been before, because it's the 11th edition, as it has been mentioned already, is with us Lena Passanen, former director of Doc Leipzig and now director of Biografilm, and who has been in charge of the festival, Doc Leipzig, that has been holding these awards for its previous existence. So thank you so much for joining us today, Lena. Would you like to say a few words?
Indeed. Good evening, everybody, and warm greetings from Italy. And indeed, I know this award really, really well. I had a great pleasure working with EU-OSHA during the last 5 years when I was the director of Doc Leipzig. And I must say that was one of the highlights of my year dealing with the great team in Bilbao. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Julia and Jonas. I'm also very happy to see that these are German projects. I must say that the fact, first of all, that you have been selected to Doclisboa selection is already a massive quality stamp in your film. I know the festival really well, and it is well known for its artistic standard. and it tells a lot of your artistic talent as well, the fact that you've been selected there. So that's already a first prize for you. The second one, that you got this EU-OSHA award, is something really, really special. And I think that you will kind of really understand that a little bit later, because winning an award, it's always great and fantastic. But the fact that your life will, the life of your film will continue much longer than you ever thought. The fact that it will be translated to so many languages and being seen in so many places around Europe is something really, really special. These are people who will use your film for their discussions and their topics that are not necessarily our usual film festival audience, but they are really people who are interested in what you are saying. And I must say that part of the reason I always loved working with EU-OSHA was that they are so open-minded, like, you know, using documentary film, using art as a tool in their work is something really special. So I think that, you know, you will have a great ride with this prize, absolutely. We are all dealing with that pandemic now. I'm currently based in Italy, where it hit really, really hard. And I can see how that is already having a great impact on our working situation. And I think that, you know, it's a new start for my friends from Bilbao with Doclisboa. In a moment when everything also in our work is changing. Many of people, they lost their work, and it's also changing. We are isolated. We can't connect with our working partners as always. So it's also having a, not just a health or safety issue, but kind of like a mental issue as well, which is something that, you know, we all have to kind of realize in the future. For Miguel and his team, I feel for you guys. We did an online festival in June. I know how tough it is to be a new head of the festival and do something totally online. But I trust that it will be a great journey for you guys too. And I'm really, really happy to see the new start for EU-OSHA also in a new place in the wonderful city of Lisbon. So I wish you all the best of luck and a very, very intense discussion and debate later on.
Thank you so much, Lena. And now I will give the floor to the person that has really been a right arm in this whole process, because we had so many intense conversations and very and discussed so closer the films, that it was really a wonderful journey so far. And getting to this selection was a full sharing process, and it was wonderful to do it with you, Bruno. And I would love to give you the word. And thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Miguel. For me, it has been a great year, and after such a great year, it's easy and it's very pleasant for me to be here this afternoon, because I only have thank yous to say, thank yous to everybody. And my first thank you is to Lena Passanen, who for so many years, for 5 years at least, when she was director of Doc Leipzig, she has been tireless in promoting the HWFA within the documentary film community, and also tireless in defending our concept, our philosophy, the agency philosophy. So thanks, Lena. We really owe you a lot. And our award, our little HWFA, wouldn't be what it is today without you. That's for sure. A big, enormous thank you to the Doclisboa team. This year has been for Doclisboa a year of reconsideration because of the health crisis. It has been for EU-OSHA and for million organizations in the world. And I saw working with the Doclisboa film, the Doclisboa team, sorry, how they rose to the challenge, how they reinvented themselves, how they reinvented the festival, and at the same time, of course, how they reinvented the HWFA space within this new story of theirs. And honestly, I found and I still find the result is amazing. So thank you, Miguel, with whom I've spent hours and hours. That's true. Thank you, Joanna, Glenda, Bruno, Patricia, Amarante today. It has been a really great pleasure, great interest to work with you. And also thank you for your patience and for your understanding of our requirements. And finally, I would like to thank my colleagues. First, my dear six focal points colleague who helped us choose the two HWFA winners this year. So thank you for Emilia from Portugal, Vladka from Slovenia, Martina from Austria, Francesca from Italy, Violetta from Poland, and Gavin from Ireland. It was nice to work with you and select and find out the winners for this year. And thanks to you and to all our fellow focal points in 30 countries for hosting so many private screenings and debates with all the winning HWFA films since 2009. And we'll host the winners film from this year. You know how much we enjoy at the agency working with you all over Europe. So thank you again to everybody, and I've probably forgotten a lot. And I wish you a very fruitful discussion and very inspiring event. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bruno. It has been really a wonderful journey so far. And now let's go for what most people have been here for, a very engaging debate that we are about to start. I really want to thank the presence of all the participants that will take part in this conversation. Elisa Cepedal with the film Work, or To Whom Does the World Belong? Jonas Held with the film Automotive, and Leon Schmidt with the film California Company Town. And to moderate the conversation, we have with us Amarant Abramovici, who curated the wonderful program that you can find online at dafilms.com, and that I really foster everyone to watch during these days, because it's available worldwide. And before the start of the conversation, we will present the spot of EU-OSHA, and they will continue. Thank you for everyone that is present.
So, hi everybody, and I'd like to welcome, even if we can't see you, all the people that can see us online, and I hope you will enjoy the conversation. It's obviously not the same, but Okay, it's working now. So, can everyone hear me? Yes. Okay. So we'll start the conversation right now. I think it's well, it's a very rich program, and obviously we're not having the conversation with all the filmmakers, but it's very, very, very nice to be able to discuss this body of work program and the issues that it raises with Elisa Sedlatshek, Jonas Helt, and Leanne Schmidt, who have chosen very different ways to approach work, or how work affects humans' lives or landscapes. I mean, all of these issues, I think, will come back in the conversation. I would just to clarify that Elisa Sedlatshek and Jonas Helt's films are in the contemporary selection that we've made, films made this year that were, competing for the award we've just seen. And they are being shown live in theaters in Lisbon, whereas California Company Town, Leanne's film, is one of the more recent films, shall we say, of the historical overview, which does go back to the beginning of cinema, thanks to Arun Farocki, who uses the Lumiere films. But the first film in that retrospective is really from 1966, so it's really like an overview of the past 50, 60 years of work in cinema, or one possible overview of that. And I first saw Leanne's film shortly after it was made, I think, 1 year maybe after the film was made in Portugal already at the time, and it struck me as a very particular way to frame this discussion about how work has changed in a very profound way everything in our lives, starting with the landscapes we inhabit and to our bodies. So maybe we could start, as I suggested before, we could start with, you could each speak briefly about the processes and how you worked in your films. And I would hand the microphone virtually to Elisa first, to speak a little bit about how you worked in your research. This is a region you are very familiar with. It is your home region, I believe, and you are working with people who are close to you, but at the same time you adopt very particular ways of approaching these realities, and particular ways of filming this and involving the people in the film.
Yeah, that's right. So the film is about the industrialization of the mining communities in northern Spain, and that's where I grew up. So the whole process of dismantling the heavy industries that happened in the 80s and 90s, I sort of grew up seeing, and I remember very vividly all the mining strikes and so on. So obviously for me the subject matter was very personal, because I was depicting something that I know very well, a place that I'm really close to. My family's still there, and obviously the people that appear in the film I'm very close to as well. But I didn't want to impose too much of my personal view on it, because the subject is so complex, why the closure of the mines happened, and the way it happened, and how the labor movement sort of failed so dramatically over the past years of the industrialization process, that I didn't want to portray too much the causes of these, but the effects of something. So I wanted to it was important to me to have a sort of distance between me and what was being told. And so I adopted an idea in which I wanted to have different points of views in the film. So obviously my point of view is there through the way I position the camera. There's also the point of view of the miners in this very lengthy assembly. There's the point of view of a film within a film, and then there's the point of view as well of a sort of external narrator who you know, I imagine was like a sort of character, like a sort of anthropology, so who comes from outside to look at this place, you know, from the outside. So that was a bit of my ideas and my creative process of how to approach this complex issue. And then in terms of the process, you know, I did do, because I don't live there anymore. I haven't lived there for a long time. So I started doing a lot of like historical research on the history of the place while I was away. And then obviously when I went back to start, before I start filming, you know, when I started looking for locations and so on, I realized that the image that I had of the working class movement and the minor struggle that I lived through my childhood, I kind of faced a completely different mining movement when I came back to do the film. So obviously I had to I wanted to capture, you know, the loss of class consciousness, if you like, which for me was quite shocking, you know, when I started making the film, because of all the things that I lived through in the 90s. So that was a little bit about the process of the film. Obviously, the filming was great because you know I do love this place and I do love all these industrial landscapes. So it was a joy for me to portray this place. But then the editing was a bit hard. It took a while to find the end form of the film. I suppose, as in many documentaries. So yeah.
Jonas, I don't know if you're there. You chose
I'm here.
You chose a very different way. You focused very clearly on two characters, two women, and we followed. I mean, we follow them in different moments throughout the film, and in a way, the film ends up building a parallel between, or a sort of parallel between their lives or their choices or the choices that are imposed on them in their work lives. And this is a very low-paid temp worker in an Audi factory and a highly paid how do you call it, headhunter for the company. So maybe you can tell us how you found this, how you found these people, how the project became alive for you, and how you worked with them.
Yes, thanks first for Elisa's words. For me, it was always important to talk about chances when we talk about work, because I think that a lot of people also who work in film are kind of privileged already by making films. And one other thought was that generations before us, work was always the thing that determined life in a way that nothing else determined life. And I think in the 21st century, we have the chance to deal with that more freely. I think that work biographies change. I think that structures in a lot of companies change, and that's a good thing and a very hopeful thing to me. And I was looking for two persons who could embody that kind of hope. because there's a lot of things that are criticized, working conditions, things that have to do with digitalization. And of course, the critique about those things are very right and just and exact. But for me, those two women in a very personal and very different way were somehow symbols of, not hope, but optimism. They deal with their challenges in a very smart and also very sympathetic and sometimes funny way. And for me, that was like one of the groundbreaking ideas that I wanted to put in the film.
Okay. Leanne, maybe I'd ask you to speak a little bit about your own work, how you decided to go on this road, and in your film, which has there's a lot of landscape, but also when people come along and appear, and this is obviously a very humanized landscape. But when people come along, it's also very important in your film. It becomes they bring something very striking and very emotional to your film, and in a way, your film talks about the world maybe after work, and I don't know how you relate to that in your work and in this film in particular.
It's interesting that you talk about landscape, because part of the concept was that there's no nature in the film. So what we see are like post-industrial landscapes. They're all inside. There's almost only artificial light. There are a lot of robots. So this is also a landscape that determines the region where I come from, because around Munich is famous for Oktoberfest and BMW and FC Bayern. And this whole car building landscape and industry was interesting to me. And I think it is something that felt specific also for my biographical background somehow, because my grandfather, he was like a steel worker, and a lot of my uncles also work in car industries. And I thought about these men who came in the past, and they somehow their way of life and working seemed a bit improbable for me in the future, especially also for me personally, because deciding to be a filmmaker was a choice of not taking that path and not making like a living or be like a breadwinner or something like that. That is usually also something that we associate with male identities and biographies. And so that was somehow my first incentive to make the film.
Okay, so I would go now to Leanne and ask her, as I said, well, I think the films connect in a way in these, because of course they speak of work in a manner that is related, because we are always speaking in these films of the classical notion of work, the industry, the mining, so that where our, let's say, our imagination of what work is has been fixated for a very long time. And in a way, the world, work has never been only that, and the world has changed in a way recently where it's become more obvious perhaps. But in Leanne's case, we're speaking of a world where all of that is gone. So how do you live after that? And she travels this road to show us that. Do you want to say some words, Leanne?
Sure. This was the first film I made in a series of films. I'm finishing the fourth that sort of look at, I guess, American thought and ideology, and to find a way to do that, to speak to those processes of belief, I guess, through landscape is something that the films hold in common. But it came in this very direct way. I had moved from Chicago, which is a very specific urban landscape. And it's one that industry, factories, a really specific kind of industry was everywhere in the city, but also mostly abandoned. So I had a performance company in Chicago, and we did a lot of performances in these abandoned factories and abandoned spaces, many of which in the subsequent 20 years have become lofts and other space. That conversion's been different, but at the time they were mostly abandoned. And then I moved to California, and that landscape was just really different. And I was like, where does labor, labor history has always interested me. And I was like, where's the labor history here? And more directly, what is this strange space I've moved to? I've always lived in a city. I've always ridden buses and trains, and now I'm in my car all the time. And so I just went to explore it and film it and see what those traces. And I'm very interested always in how our life is structured around economic systems, but specifically. And I think that interest has actually deepened since the Company Town film, in terms of, we have this really viral idea of freedom in the United States. That is, freedom means for many people in the United States, this ability to kind of participate in the free market, right? To be free, to be labor, but that's it, So I just took the approach of going to these spaces like, California is interesting, like a lot of places where you don't get reuse the way you do in Chicago necessarily, because it's so large. So towns would sit abandoned, towns would sit empty, and you could sort of see those traces even 60 years after the town had closed, 30 years after the town had closed. So I just started filming those. And I wanted the film, it's a catalog film. It has about 18 towns in it, but really you could sort of put down in any town and sort of make it a company town if you filmed it in a certain way. All towns are sort of organized around the labor that's within it. And so I was trying to find a way. The film works from the most kind of expected idea, I think, of labor, like mining towns, or the railroad towns, or to more and more diffuse ideas of labor, so it ends in Silicon Valley, which sort of, it probably ends at this precipice of what Jonas is talking about, of digital labor and labor, labor that diffuses and alters in a different way. And just looked at what the structures were, and the different towns and the different industries had different relationships to their workers. Some were funded and maintained by the company, in this really patriarchal but sustained way. They had community centers, they had, and those towns actually often people were very, very nostalgic about. And then there are towns that they were just deeply influenced. So it goes through this kind of history of use and labor use in California, but maybe by extension, the United States. So that was the structure of the film. And then I just filmed it over 2 or 3 years as I could in these journeys, and, to try and set it a little bit chronologically, though I don't know if that's evident necessarily until you sort of look back at it.
You mean chronologically in terms of?
In terms of the industries, really, like sort of, so from mining histories, railroad histories, through then to steelworker industries, to the prison towns, to Silicon Valley, like working through these, the entertainment industry, these industries that kind of come up in California. And in terms of the trace of people, most of the representation of the people is the things they've like left behind, like the wallpaper they've put up, or murals they've done, or I, in all my films, I like to use the text people have put up, whether it's in these kind of amateur art that people decorate the spaces with. And then most of the human voices are archive, they're archive voices. So they're a little bit of ghosts. And I don't use any of the direct people. There's a few recordings. And that's something I do in most of my films. I'm a little wary of character, I think.
I would have a question. Leanne, it's very interesting what you described, like also with the road as somehow heading to the Silicon Valley. And of course, I can only confirm that the factories, the smart factories that are built today, and also in car industries, they are way smarter than any human could be somehow. But I wonder, when you like connect this historical road with like biographies, I realized that here in the car industry, a lot of workers voted for nationalists, and I only know that to my extent that in the Rust Belt, Trump also had a lot of success. I wonder if you see any connections also there, maybe on a global scale somehow.
Sure. I mean, the film is 16 years old, right? But in many ways, you can sort of, I point at it, and then the film that followed, which is Last Buffalo Hunt, as sort of these, I mean, you can see many of the traces of where we're at in these two films. Like I said, there has become kind of this is actually the fourth film I'm working on now, is this intentional build of this conservative thought around what it means to be I suppose free to participate in these. And what really was this denigration of kind of embrace of the pride of labor to kind of a refusal of that, to want to be something else. And a real betrayal. I mean, the denigration of labor rights in the United States from the 1970s to now is profound. Workers don't really have many rights in the United States at any level. They're almost all at-will employees, as is pointed out, I think, in your films as well. They have kind of given up this belief system of that they should, you know, and I think it goes to a kind of multi-faceted approach of a denigration of an education system, a shift of ideologies to sort of believe in your own self-exploitation. It's a complicated thing, and I think a failure to sort of adapt to new economies, you know, a refusal to put any services into adapting to new economies for people. So I mean, it's a complicated question because it's 50 years or 200 years of history, depending how you look at it. I think what's interesting is if you look at the election we're about to have in 6 days, I think you'll wonder what will happen, because you can say that the Rust Belt was overwhelmingly Trump, but that's not true. You know, there was no overwhelmingly rightist vote in the United States, but there is a voting system that allows a minority vote to put people in power. But there is a lot of support among the working class for Trump. And there's a lot of reasons you can talk about with that.
And what would the reasons be? Like, can you name them?
I mean, I feel like I mean,
because I really wondered about that also, like why do people vote for a party that is really not helping them with like getting better rights or better access or better education? And for me, this question is not answered at all. And I was not talking about a majority, but about this impulse that I really didn't really understand.
Right. It's not purely an American impulse, right? I mean, in any way. And I mean, I think we've had a huge amount of money, I mean, a vast amount of money put into creating the social conditions where people will vote for people that absolutely don't have their best interest. I mean, there's been funding since the 1950s or the 1930s, as soon as labor started, to say, how can we denigrate the labor movement? How do we break any kind of unity between the working class? And it's been systematic. It's been in the legal system. It's been in the educational system. it's been in the mass media. And those forces eventually come together so that people ultimately become convinced of narratives that are simply untrue, that are dangerous to them. I mean, there's a number, like there's a really good book, I think it's called Dying of Being White or Dying of Whiteness, maybe, that takes these 4 case studies in the United States of legislation. It's education in Kansas, it's gun rights in Tennessee, and looks at like, why have people voted for legislation that literally makes them live less long, makes their children have less access, healthcare. And a lot of it has to do with like a simultaneous denigration of sort of the labor movement and the ability for people to organize around labor, and the and education both at the K-12 level, higher education, and mass media. I mean, there's a lot of different forces at play there. But it's been planned and funded and intentionally put into place, along with gerrymandering or shifting of voting laws, denigration of who can vote. So it's, you know, all of these systems, and it took a while for it to work, and now it's where we are.
But I think it's also it's really planned on a global scale and also
Yes.
connected on a global scale. And I also found very interesting somehow that a lot of right-wing voters had a migrant background themselves from Russia or from Turkey, and that the connections there are very close, and also, of course, by mass media, by social media, and that these like the arguments, they were so convincing and they were very short. That's something that I realized. Like they said, okay, you have a job now. Will you have a job tomorrow? We will try to make you have a job tomorrow. And I wondered like what we could also do with films, like, because we tend to make things, of course, complex and open and not try to give too simple answers, which is a good thing. But I really had a question about filmmaking itself here, like saying, okay, how can we deal with that, like this shortness and this also the speed of information and answers that are given?
Maybe can Elisa jump in, because you spoke about this idea that people are disconnected from in a miners area, which has a very long and powerful history of struggle and class conscience and everything. How this is deleted in the last few decades, and now I don't know. I think in Portugal we feel a lot. It's very subtle sometimes, but we feel a lot that there is a general discourse around making workers who have some rights, or who have, you know, very basic and, you know, just normal or basic labor rights, as constantly describing them as entitled, or you know, over pampered workers. And it's like this constant attack on, well, but they have job security, or they have good salaries.
Yeah, and that has happened a lot precisely with the miners in Spain, because they have acquired a certain amount of rights through the years and their own struggles. They fought for their rights, so therefore they achieved certain things, you know. But what you were talking about before, about, you know, this sort of process of a reactionary society, and how I think is in all the industrialized areas happens the same, and is happening the same now in the mining area in Asturias, which traditionally has had a very strong politics of, you know, mostly everyone there was an anarchist, a socialist, or a communist, and those people fought for their rights even when they didn't have any under a dictatorship. And now these miners who fought for it see how their grandsons are joining like nationalistic parties, and they're becoming sort of fascists themselves because they don't know their own history. And it's shocking to see, you know, because I can see some of my friends from school who have become policemen, and they're super right wing, and I'm like, it doesn't seem like we come from the same place, you know. It's quite shocking. But you know, the labor movement in Asturias is quite a paradigmatic place, because you know it has had a lot of heavy industries, and the labor movement history is quite rich because of this reason, you know, coal and steel and shipyards and so on. But it's quite significant because since the 80s, since Spain joined the EU, you know, and had to follow certain the industrialization rules that the EU imposed, there's been a dismantling of all the industries, and it is since then that the movement has been like going down. And at the beginning there was a lot of resistance towards mine closures, but then like a sort of perverse system of corruption within the unions themselves occur, and as funding was coming from Europe to reindustrialize and create new industries, unions acquired a lot of power because they decided who would go to work in these new industries. And there was an implementation of early retirement with miners. So you would retire with the category that you had, and union leaders were giving job categories to certain workers. So you know, this created a sort of network of corruption, and the unions instead of having the power that the workers gave them, they sort of became part of the state apparatus, if you like. And it's a very complex issue that I didn't want to go in my film, because I didn't want to start, you know, it's your fault or it's someone else's fault. It's a very tricky question to talk about these. But you know, there are reasons for all this, and yeah, I mean, the effects are quite devastating and sad to see, really.
I wanted to say that I'm not quite sure how it works, but I think it's just a chat room that people can join in. I mean, at least put questions, not actually join in, but put questions or make comments if they want in the Q&A chat room, and we'll do our best to take them in and react to those too. So that'd be nice.
I was going to say that there was a moment in Jonas's film that I thought was really interesting, that I think goes to some of this, where she goes and she's heard that other people have been the assembly worker, that other people have been hired back by certain shift workers, that they've requested certain people.
Have you mic?
Worker as I am, I'm a better worker, and
yeah, she is talking to a unionist in that moment, and I think the scene was interesting because it kind of also shows what Elisa was describing with the corruption, or like I would call it a system of favors in the case of like Audi, and there is always this weird thing of like who's having advantages and who is not having advantages, and I think that people are competing a lot harder about these advantages if they don't have the feeling of this freedom to participate that you described in the beginning, the end, because I think a lot of people who feel the freedom to participate in the markets don't compete that hard. They are more like, okay, I'll be fine. I'm qualified. I have networks, I have contacts, and so on. But if you feel the urge to compete on such a hard level that even goes to like sexual favors, I think you already are in a place where you're not much thinking about like demanding rights or like.
Well, that's what I was pointing to.
New networks, yeah.
I mean, yes, there's favoritism she's pointing out, but she's also participating in the system too, right? By sort of by saying that I deserve these versus her because that's what the system builds. And I think that's, as soon as you take away any kind of common goal and it's just about the individual kind of fighting for what that's behind so much of it. And that's sort of what the system shift is. So that was just it, that moment really stood out to me in terms of, and a little bit what was interesting is the headhunter, when she came in second, I thought she actually had this really interesting attitude of like, second is good, but immediately she was like, but I didn't have the same resources. It's a similar structure. She's just at a higher level of it, though, of course, at some point when they don't need labor, they won't need hers either, so, but it was this interesting kind of.
Yeah, but I mean, she's more like, okay, I'm second in the competition, but I'll be fine because I will have a little hut on an island someday. So I don't care too much necessarily.
Right, because she has the resources from the system,
yes.
right?
And for the least labor, it's more like, okay, if I don't have a job by next month, I will have to move back in with my family. And that's definitely not good for me. This will cause a lot of harm. And I think they are both on some level also exiting this system of advantages somehow. Like when the headhunter Eva, when she's talking about that the image or like her appearance plays a big role when she's contacting customers or headhunting personnel and experts, engineers and so on. And at some point, also because of the film or during the film, she was deciding to be more open about her being gay. And I think that's also something where she said, okay, I don't want to work based on that advantage anymore. And with Seda, the least labor, it's also the same thing. Like she's complaining. She's not saying, okay, I take this advantage. She's saying, okay, this is not right. And in the end, she's successful with that. And that's some form of narrative. I don't know if it worked out in the film, but to me, it was important to portray two people who try not to be in favor of someone else all the time. I can see the questioning looks.
I'm not quite convinced, to be honest. I'm not sure how they end up any different at the end than at the. I mean, you know, gay people are also part of capitalism. Like I'm confused by that. And what I remember her talking about is moving from being in that to something like real estate or something else, which is also a system. So it's a complicated, I think.
Yes, but in the case that I described, it's more dealing a lot with older heterosexual men. It's not like a system that has a lot of gay personnel, I would say.
Okay, we have a question from Julia, who started off. You can see the question, but I'll read it out loud. When working on your respective films, so to all three of you, who is the audience you hope to address, to speak to, and how relevant is this question for you in the making process? Who wants to start? Maybe I could hint at something first, as a first possibility to answer this question. How is for you the process of when you show the film to the people you made the film with, or even in Leanne's case, how do you show again the film to the people who helped you or who appear in the film, characters or not? And from then on, the other audiences, who do you aim? Elisa, you were starting.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that I mean, I don't particularly think of the audience, because I guess the audience is not like, I don't know, a mass of people. It's impossible to know all the spectators, and you know, as diverse as you know, films I like to see, I suppose there's, you know, loads of people there who could like the film and have nothing to do with me. So I mean, there's also not like a message that I want to convey or anything like that. You know, it's more, you kind of try to build something a bit more affective and emotional. So in that sense, I guess I do not think about the audience, but I did think a little bit about the audience of the mining valleys, you know, and I was looking forward to have a lot of screenings and conversations with them, which I could only have 2 because of when COVID started, and we had to cut it short. But and then in regards with the miners, well, so some of the miners really liked the film, you know, and then there was one who didn't really like it, but I already knew he was not going to like it because he likes action films, and he was always mentioning about when we're going to shoot the sex scene and then the action scene and so on. So yeah, but you know, I think generally they were all quite pleased.
Jonas, who do you think about?
Yeah, this question of the audience, good question. I think it is complex. I think it's diverse. It's hard to give a short answer, like always. But for me, choosing a topic maybe is the first thing. And I realized that at parties, people always talk about jobs. Like after 10 or 15 minutes, people group into job groups somehow. Like these are like the students, these are like whoever. And I realized, okay, this is so much structuring our society, and all of them somehow wonder how their work is going to look in the future. And then I think, like for me, a film has a chance to work if the protagonists, if I can identify with the protagonists and their struggle, and then when they describe the film to their peer groups, I think that's an interesting moment. And that happened with Seda, with the least labor. And she said, like, yeah, this is a documentary, but it's a bit different. It's more not like the thing that you watch on TV. And I thought, okay, that's good. That's a cool thing. And the same was with Eva, the headhunter, like a freelancer that I identified with on a very different level. And for me, that is the first audience test somehow. But of course, also during the editing, I'm thinking a lot about audience and all the people who are working on the film. I always try to be as open as possible to their feedback and try to realize what they like, what they don't like. And then, of course, I make my decisions based on that. So I think the creation of audience starts even before the first shot on camera.
I don't think of audience in quite that same way. I mean, I have, I have a really uncomfortable relationship to the word documentary. But one thing I do find really useful is this idea of document, right? And it creates this text that exists in the world. And I think this program is so interesting because it pulls these films across 100 years or really 60 years of discussions about labor. And you can see the way that films work, both as the immediate document or documentary of the time, but also as these documents that live on through time and sort of start to speak to other texts. And I think I've seen that happen with this film. I was in my early 30s when the film premiered, so I had this. It's at the film festivals, and it's showing, and that's a very specific audience as a filmmaker. But since then, it's been online. It's shown in libraries. It's shown in a lot in academic situations, and that has just sort of made it different in terms of how people react to it. And again, it's not a character-based documentary. The only character-based documentary I made was the one right after this. And I had the experience of using this hunting guide as kind of a typical figure of a sort of caught in the economy of this cowboy hunt. He did these hunts on this buffalo. And I had a very difficult situation when he watched it. He was very aware of all of his frailties and how he was being used as kind of an example of a thought process and things, and something I'm really wary of. And so I've shown this film in many of the regions it was shot, and I've shown it all over the world, and people perceive it differently. They're like, oh, I know that place, I grew up in that place, or I'm in Argentina and I have a similar history around certain mining histories. But I really think you make work so that it holds as a text, as a work, and then people come to it in all of these different encounters over time. I mean, we can talk about failures of distribution and the kind of limits of audience that you see in kind of cultural capital, but that's a really complex conversation. But I do think you ultimately think of a film versus media in different ways.
Do you want to, does one of you or all of you want to jump into Bruno's question about, so I have a question. Elisa is talking about loss of class consciousness and about systematic denigration of labor rights. We at the agency think that having a decent and being safe, a decent work and being safe at work and staying healthy at work is a fundamental human right. Do you, through your experience, your research, your work, think that workers today are still at least fighting for their safety and health at work? Well, you show very different work environments. I mean, obviously, Jonas and Elisa, very, very different work environments. But yes, perhaps we can, because it is an interesting issue how the labor movement, and maybe for us, this is not completely us, in Europe or even in the US, maybe it's not always completely clear that the labor movement starts off because work conditions and life conditions for workers in the 18th and 19th century are such that it's infrahuman to our eyes today. So obviously standards have been reached in the Western world that were unimaginable 100 or 150 years ago. But still, is this still the core of the struggle, or is the struggle beyond this, or is there no struggle at all? I don't know. How would you frame it?
Yeah, I think if I may answer, is that okay, Elisa? First, you can, because what you said before about that people don't know their history, that kind of made me think also regarding that question, like the right to work. I think that industrial work doesn't have a lot of future in the Western world. And I think looking back somehow and what people have been through in fighting for healthy work and also fighting for workers' rights can give us part of the answer what our lives might look like regarding to work. I don't know if anybody understands what I want to say here, but if we say, okay, in the future, maybe robots will produce all the products that we use and consume, then maybe it's good to think about our understanding of work nowadays. And I think there are a lot of answers, and also saying, okay, what work is healthy, what work gives me a healthy feeling and a healthy life, and is that always connected to a demand to work? And should we also in the near future always fight for these demands that people just want to work and they are struggling just to work, and even if they see that their work doesn't have a future? So there's one question, and the answer is a lot more questions.
I mean, one thing you see, I think all over, but you see it in the a lot, is that this idea of a work that's supposed to provide any support or care or is kind of gone, is really under assault, right? So you have people working multiple jobs and sort of solely responsible for themselves. And I think it's also one thing I've seen in my lifetime and working on the different films is a real loss of any separation between who you are as an individual, separate from your work, separate from what you do. So any idea that you're not supposed to work 90 hours a week in order to be able to do your basic needs, I feel it both like in the academic class, people willing to sort of give up more and more and more hours. And obviously in a working class, it's more in terms of gig economy, or, we have something on in California right now that people are voting on about the Uber drivers, right? Should they be considered employees even, or should they be considered freelancers? Because it's a question of whether they should be provided with employee rights, including healthcare. And the politics around it are really interesting. And who speaks of, well, we shouldn't do that because then we can't have them because it would be too expensive. And it's I don't know. It's become so complicated to even separate out who is supposed to be responsible for providing levels of safety if everybody's kind of a freelance work.
Yeah, and I basically agreed with everything they've been saying. Indeed, we have changed the relations of production, and the organization of labor and work has changed dramatically, and the corporation has replaced the factory, and almost, today capitalist profit amounts to the production of subjects, if you like. It's us who creates profit now. It's our data, our lives, and so on. So I suppose in terms of more health and safety, it's more to do what Jonas was saying, is to do that, to see how do we hold our rights as workers, and what new weapons do we find to sort of resist this new change in capitalism. I mean, I don't have the answer for that, but I guess, it's maybe we should be thinking more in those terms.
Yeah, I think it's a bit scary that we're even we'd be discussing, we would be fighting for health and safety at work. That's the scary thing, is that we're still fighting for that, and in the 1920s and 30s, it was possible to claim that workers were entitled to holidays or the right to free time, happiness, and all of that. It's we're really falling behind in those rights. The other rights, the rights that have to do with what are you entitled to besides work,
Yeah.
And now you're entitled to more work, and if you're lucky, to work that holds on for a while and with minimal conditions.
I don't know. It's of course we're still fighting for about the same questions somehow. But what I think is that the producing economy somehow moved further and further east, somehow one time around the globe. And what they were getting away from was this responsibility and this kind of very hard fought for organizational, institutionalized rights of healthcare and like unemployment, and all those questions were somehow answered in the 20th century. And now it was just like, okay, let's just go to the very far end of the world where people don't know anything about those ideas. And like this whole, what the answer now is somehow this whole freelancing concept. Like everyone can forge its own destiny, and this has become like an absurd level somehow. I mean, if you work as an Uber driver for a big company from the Silicon Valley, or if you work for Audi, you are a worker of that company. You're not freelancing if you only work for that company. And also what I wanted to portray in the film is like, of course, everyone is saying, okay, no, this person is hired by that company, and the company in the middle just got the contract to hire people. So we don't have anything to do with anybody if anyone gets sick or has an accident or so on. And I think it's very important that we still have some working institutions who guarantee those structures, also on a law-giving level, and who try to influence lawmakers, because it's of course a political question. And I think the economic forces, on the other hand, are very, very strong, who try to influence also the lawmaking process in terms of, you know, we can't afford working rights in that way. It's just too expensive. If you introduce this and that law, we will have to build the next factory somewhere else. And I think what we see now somehow is like you can build a factory all over the world. It doesn't matter where it is, because there is hardly anyone needed to run factory anyway, or at least there are some people needed to run factory, but hardly anyone is working there. So we should really think about what is healthy work, and what are workers' rights, and what happens with a lot of people who still depend so much on work, and whose rights or whose freedom of speech is not guaranteed also towards employers, because somehow they go to work and get into a dictatorship somehow, because they can't say anything about the workers' conditions, and then they leave the workplace, and then we try to tell them, hey, now you're back in democracy. And I think that's not going to work. And I think that's also part of the reason for the political shift that I at least am very afraid of.
Maybe to go towards a close, or maybe I would ask you to share in whichever manner you feel is more appropriate, because you work in very different ways, each one of you, and but maybe say something about the way work is organized in your own profession as filmmakers, how you deal with the issue of it being also a form of labor, and working with other people, and how your conviction, how your ideas about work and how work should be are, how you manage to implement them or not in your work as filmmakers. Leanne, start off, please.
Yeah, I mean, when I moved from performance to film, part of the move was, you know, the arts funding in the United States collapsed, essentially. So most of the funding became commercial funding. So I had a performance company, you know, and we paid everybody sort of for their time, of course, for the rehearsals and the process of workshops, and it was a slow process. But when that funding ended, we couldn't do that anymore. So I sort of shifted to this, I mean, my films I make on my own, essentially. The labor is predominantly mine, if not. And that was very intentional through at least Company Town, and then the film after it purged this land, a little less so in the Buffalo film, because I just wanted a relationship to labor I could control, and that what I could control was my own labor, in a lot of ways, and feel good about. So I think it's a complicated question in terms of running crews and doing other things. And when you're working on funding, there are other projects I've done where I've brought collaborators in when I've had larger grants. And then again, you try and be as equitable and as generous with that money, since mostly grant money feels always like gift money, it's such a different relationship to funding, and labor. You get this sort of larger funding for work. But yeah, that's sort of the answer for me was always like, I try and do as much of the labor on my own as I can.
Elisa, do you want to talk?
Yeah, I mean, similar to Liane, we did have a small crew in some bits of the shoot, and of course all the funding we had for the film was to pay everybody, and even though you sort of have a little paid within that budget, you end up just putting on your own money to make the film. But luckily, my cinematographer is my husband, so he can work for free as well for me. And he owns a lot of equipment, so we can have that for free too. But yeah, again, it's mostly us too. I direct and edit. He does the grading, and the rest of it, yeah, we do pay people, according to the union rates in Spain in this case, or here in London. So yeah, just do as much work as you can, I guess, which is great also, because then you do learn the whole process of filmmaker, and there's not such a division of labor as it is in the industrial cinema. I obviously don't want to work within the industry of cinema. I want to produce things differently, so that makes you have to be really, really involved. And sometimes I have to record sound on set, or but I do enjoy it. I do enjoy every bit of the process. So yeah.
Jonah.
I think, in my opinion, documentary film is a very much discussed term in itself, but I would describe it as a mix of art, journalism, and film business. And I think it's, of course, it's a hard and competitive business somehow that's also under a lot of economic pressure. And of course, not all the projects get funding. And I had a very 60s approach about that, and founded a collective and tried to make film a really collaborative thing that it is, in my opinion. But also from funding and production companies, the whole feedback was not very positive, because I think it's also that people want to believe in a person who is creating the film. And no one really cares how much work that is, and no one cares how many friends and family and whoever was involved worked unpaid hours, long hours, night shifts, whatsoever, just to make the film happen. But I think, especially in documentary films, it's a very important question, like how can we involve the people in front of the camera, if there are people in front of the camera, in the whole process of the making, and also in the rewards, even if it's just recognition. And I try to offer people that I always tell them, if I make money with the film, I will have everybody contribute based on working days, and we all get the same pay somehow. And I made good experiences with that. But it's also, of course, an ethical question, because you shouldn't pay protagonists, otherwise you turn them into actors. So It's always I think there's not one solution or one model that can give a good answer, but I think there's so much, also due to technology, there's so much change in the way we make films. We need a lot less personnel also. I could shoot a lot just on my own in a one-man team somehow. And that was also an advantage for the making of the film. Of course, I profited from that. But on the other hand, I think it's even more important to really think about what makes a film and what makes it specific, because I think all three of us, we're not working for our own YouTube channel, and that's also something that is very present and has a lot more audience than sometimes than at least the films that I made so far.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and also another question, because I think it's important, I felt it was important in some films in the historical retrospective, a sense that there was, especially in the 60s, maybe 60s and 70s, that filming workers was also a way also obviously to give voice to their struggle, to their needs and everything, but also there was a sort of belief or a hope that cinema could help the struggle and help improve their lives, and at least protect these people in their work environments, because often filmmakers would, film people who were very active and in protest and everything, and film could be a sort of a shield, at least, if not really a loudspeaker for these people. How do you feel? How do you feel about that now? How do you, or is it something that doesn't appeal to you? The idea that your films could be a part of it, a part of these workers' movements or struggles, whether organized or more individual. How do you feel about that?
I mean, it's interesting. You think of all the moments where technology has sort of changed what the form was before, right? And in many ways, in terms of that immediacy of getting somebody's voice out or an immediate struggle, lives in other places than your traditional documentary film. It lives on the YouTube channels, or it lives in the social media. It lives in the stream because of there's the omnipresence of cameras. And so when I look at these films, particularly Elisa's and mine, but Jonas's too, like there's something happening that's more about contextualizing a process historically, which is less immediate because there's such a delay on the film. And so it has just it's also about articulating histories and context. I mean, we talk about these, Jonas talked earlier about the complexity of like, the right is really good at these short, fast things. And then these films are sort of complex in their thought process. But I think there's a place for that, but whether it serves the need for getting immediate voices out in 2020, I don't know. We might be talking about different things at this point and different functions. And I think about that a lot, about like activist work, which is, I don't consider myself making activist work, but I have a lot of respect for it. And it serves a different need, and it serves a different politic, or a political need. So.
I think, I don't think it's the role of the filmmaker to give a voice to those who don't have it anymore. Maybe perhaps that was in the past. There's an idea but Gilles Deleuze talks about, how modern political cinema its importance is the fact that it has realized that the people are no longer there, that they don't exist, you know. So before in you know, like the Russian cinema, the people were there, they were represented as a mass, you know, that they were willing, they were striving towards revolution, you know. Or in early American cinema, the people were there, they were struggling towards democracy. But now, you know, in contemporary political cinema, the people are no longer there, and so they cannot be represented. And I quite like the idea. You know, I like to think that if my film can contribute to something within the mining valleys, is to show them that, I don't like to use the word identity very much, but you know, like that the sort of identity these people created surrounding the work they had and the labor movement is no longer there, and the collective does not exist anymore. So maybe through seeing the films, or through reflecting on this idea, you know, we can all create a new future, a new creative future that's better, you know, and not think too much about the past, because we do need to create something else that's gone.
I think I always wanted to be part of a movement, but I never was quite convinced by anyone, and I think that's why I started to make films of my own somehow. And I think, of course, it helps. I think that also time is on our side, especially if you see that films are a document that maybe create a different kind of audience, like not the immediate audience, not the one that tells you what just happened, but the one that's interested in the question, like, I think I know everything, but still I don't know anything. And in the case of this film that I presented here, I think it helped the protagonist to more openness about their own identity, and it also helped the second one to a permanent job somehow, because of course when you spend a lot of time on people and give them your attention, and also the attention of others, and documenting all the process, it's hard to make these people invisible and part of a mass that's just not present. You make them an example, and of course then people are interested in giving the film a happy end somehow, and that's what it turned out to be. And I must say I'm a little bit proud of that, because I think it changed something, yeah, and also on a permanent way.
Well, unless you want to, or one of you or all of you want to add something, I think we could wrap it up here, but feel free to make a last brief intervention if you want.
Thank you for the great moderation, and also thank you EU-OSHA again for the prize, and I hope that everyone will keep up the work.
And I also like to thank, you know, the festival, and you know, this discussion has been most interesting, and just to say, Jonas and Leanne, how much I enjoy the films, and you know, meeting them here and talking to them. So yeah.
Yes, I'm happy to be involved, and I enjoyed watching the other two films tremendously, and I enjoyed the program, looking at the way the program is put together. So it's an honor to be included. So thanks for the conversation.
Well, thank you all. I'm really happy that it was possible to have in this way this conversation, and also to live this thing that I think is really important in our work as filmmakers, which is, or programmers also in my case, but which is to watch each other's work and be able to think of each other as part of a community of ideas, of circulation of ideas, of a discussion, an ongoing discussion between each other's films and words. So thank you very, very much for being a part of it today, and thank you to everyone who's been following us and for your patience for this online format. Thank you, and have a very, very good rest of the day and good screenings at Doclisboa or online at DA Films.